Sitting Bull was a Native American icon and a complex figure who became one of the most celebrated leaders of the 19th century. Tjątkäŋka Íyotake, medicine man, warrior and spiritual leader, was born in the Grand River region of present-day South Dakota around 1831. He came from a proud Hunkpapa Lakota family. He had a distinctive personality marked by fierce independence and an unbreakable commitment to his people's way of life. Sitting Bull's early years were marked by tradition and training in the ways of the Lakota. His father, Returns Again, was a respected warrior and leader among the Hunkpapa band. The family lived according to the ancient rhythms of the Great Plains, following the buffalo herds and maintaining the spiritual practices that had sustained their people for generations. Young Sitting Bull, originally called Jumping Badger, learned early that life demanded courage and wisdom. When Sitting Bull was 14 years old, he joined his first war party against the Crow, traditional enemies of the Lakota. During this raid, he struck an enemy warrior with his coup stick, counting coup in the traditional manner that brought honor to Plains warriors. His father was so proud of this achievement that he gave his son a new name, Sitting Bull, and gave him his own war shield. This marked the boy's transition to manhood and began his journey as a warrior. The name Sitting Bull would become legendary, but the young man still had much to prove. He participated in numerous raids and battles against rival tribes, earning a reputation for bravery and tactical skill. The intertribal warfare of the plains was not about conquest or territory in the European sense, but about honor, horses, and demonstrating courage. Sitting Bull excelled in this warrior culture, accumulating honors and establishing himself as a leader among young men. By his early 20s, Sitting Bull had already distinguished himself in combat and was recognized as a skilled warrior. He bore the scars of battle, having been wounded multiple times in fights with the Crow, Assiniboine, and other rival tribes. Each scar was a mark of honor, proof of his willingness to face danger for his people. He was also developing a reputation as a generous man who shared his wealth and looked after those in need within his community. In his 20s and 30s, Sitting Bull became increasingly involved in the spiritual life of his people. He was known for his visions and his ability to communicate with the spirit world. He participated in the Sun Dance, the most sacred ceremony of the Plains tribes, where warriors would pierce their flesh and dance while attached to a pole, seeking visions and demonstrating their devotion to the Great Spirit. Sitting Bull's spiritual power grew alongside his reputation as a warrior. He became a medicine man, a holy man who could interpret visions and provide guidance to his people. During the 1850s and 1860s, the world of the Lakota was changing rapidly. White settlers were pushing westward in increasing numbers. The discovery of gold in California had brought thousands of travelers across the plains. The government in Washington was making treaties with various tribes, trying to confine them to specific territories. Sitting Bull watched these developments with growing concern. He saw that the white man's way of life was fundamentally incompatible with the freedom his people had always known. Unlike some Lakota leaders who were willing to negotiate and compromise with the whites, Sitting Bull took a hard line. He refused to sign treaties that would limit his people's territory or their way of life. He believed that the land belonged to all people, that it could not be bought or sold, and that the Lakota had as much right to roam freely as they always had. This position would define his entire life and bring him into conflict with the United States government. In 1863, the United States Army began a campaign against the Lakota and other Plains tribes in response to conflicts in Minnesota. Sitting Bull led his warriors in several skirmishes against the soldiers. He was learning that fighting the white soldiers was different from traditional intertribal warfare. The soldiers had superior weapons and seemed to fight without honor, attacking villages and killing women and children. Sitting Bull adapted his tactics accordingly, becoming a skilled guerrilla fighter. By the late 1860s, Sitting Bull had become one of the most influential leaders among the Lakota. In 1868, he was chosen as the principal chief of the entire Lakota nation, an unprecedented honor. This position recognized not just his skills as a warrior, but his wisdom, his generosity, and his unwavering commitment to the traditional Lakota way of life. He was now responsible for the welfare of thousands of people. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 established the Great Sioux Reservation, including the Black Hills, as Lakota territory. The government promised that this land would belong to the Lakota forever. Sitting Bull was skeptical of these promises. He had seen too many treaties broken, too many commitments abandoned when they became inconvenient for the whites. He refused to become a reservation Indian, choosing instead to remain in the unceded territories where his people could still hunt buffalo and live free. Throughout the early 1870s, Sitting Bull led his people in resistance to white encroachment. He fought against the Northern Pacific Railroad, which was surveying a route through Lakota territory. He raided settlements and attacked military expeditions. He was defending his homeland and his people's way of life in the only way he knew how. The army considered him a hostile, a renegade who refused to submit to government authority. In 1874, everything changed. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills, the sacred heart of Lakota territory, and discovered gold. The news triggered a gold rush. Thousands of miners flooded into the Black Hills, violating the Fort Laramie Treaty. The government made half-hearted attempts to keep the miners out, but soon gave up and instead tried to buy the Black Hills from the Lakota. Sitting Bull refused to sell. The Black Hills were sacred, the center of the Lakota world. No amount of money could compensate for their loss. When negotiations failed, the government issued an ultimatum. All Lakota must report to reservations by January 31, 1876 or be considered hostile. It was winter when the Plains tribes traditionally camped in sheltered areas. The deadline was impossible to meet and was clearly designed to fail. Sitting Bull ignored it. He would not surrender his freedom or his people's sacred lands. In the spring of 1876, Sitting Bull presided over a great gathering of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people in Montana Territory. Thousands came together, one of the largest assemblies of Plains Indians ever recorded. They knew that war was coming. The army was already mobilizing expeditions to force the non-reservation Indians onto the reservations. It would be a fight for survival, for everything the Lakota held sacred. In early June, Sitting Bull participated in a sun dance ceremony. He had 50 pieces of flesh cut from his arms as an offering and danced for hours until he fell into a trance. In his vision, he saw soldiers falling into the camp like grasshoppers falling from the sky. He interpreted this as a promise of victory. The people were encouraged. Their spiritual leader had seen their triumph. On June 17, 1876, Lakota and Cheyenne warriors fought General George Crook's column to a standstill at the Battle of the Rosebud. Sitting Bull, now in his mid-40s, did not participate directly in the fighting. His role had evolved from warrior to leader and spiritual guide. Younger men like Crazy Horse led the warriors in battle, while Sitting Bull provided strategic guidance and spiritual support. 8 days later, on June 25, 1876, Sitting Bull's vision came true. Lieutenant Colonel Custer and the 7th Cavalry attacked the massive Indian encampment on the Little Bighorn River. Custer had divided his forces and led approximately 210 men in a direct assault on the village. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The warriors, numbering perhaps 2,000, counterattacked with devastating effect. During the battle, Sitting Bull was in the camp helping to defend the women and children and organize the response. Crazy Horse and other war leaders directed the fighting. Within an hour, Custer and every man under his immediate command were dead. It was the most complete victory Native Americans ever achieved against the United States Army. The news of Custer's defeat shocked the nation. The Army's response was swift and overwhelming. More troops poured into the region. The great Indian encampment broke up, with different bands scattering to avoid the soldiers. The Army pursued relentlessly, attacking villages, destroying food supplies, and wearing down the resistance. The buffalo herds were being systematically exterminated, depriving the Plains tribes of their primary food source. Over the following months, band after band surrendered and went to the reservations. Sitting Bull refused. He led his followers north toward Canada, hoping to find refuge beyond the reach of American soldiers. In May 1877, Sitting Bull and his people crossed into Canada. They found sanctuary there, but life was hard. The buffalo was scarce in Canada too. The Canadian government provided minimal assistance, making it clear that the Lakota were not welcome to stay permanently. Sitting Bull's people faced starvation. For 4 years, Sitting Bull remained in Canada, a leader in exile. His followers gradually drifted back to the United States, unable to endure the hunger and hardship. The great chief who had defeated Custer was now presiding over a slowly disintegrating community. He sent messages to Washington, trying to negotiate terms for his return, but the government insisted on unconditional surrender. Finally, in July 1881, Sitting Bull surrendered. He crossed back into the United States with fewer than 200 followers, all that remained of the thousands who had followed him. At Fort Buford, he formally surrendered his rifle to his young son, who handed it to the commanding officer. It was a symbolic gesture, showing that he was surrendering not as a defeated warrior, but as a father concerned for the next generation. Sitting Bull was held as a prisoner of war for 2 years at Fort Randall. The government feared his influence and wanted to isolate him from his people. During this time, he was treated relatively well, but the confinement was difficult for a man who had spent his entire life in freedom. He was finally allowed to settle on the Standing Rock Reservation in 1883. Life on the reservation was a profound adjustment for Sitting Bull. The traditional Lakota way of life was gone. The buffalo were extinct on the plains. His people were confined to a small territory, dependent on government rations that were often inadequate and of poor quality. The Indian agent, James McLaughlin, was determined to break down traditional tribal structures and force assimilation. McLaughlin saw Sitting Bull as an obstacle to progress and worked to undermine his influence. Despite these challenges, Sitting Bull remained a leader to his people. He advocated for their rights, complained about the poor treatment they received, and tried to preserve what he could of Lakota culture and traditions. He was a voice of resistance in a world that demanded submission. In 1885, Sitting Bull joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, touring cities in the United States and Canada. It was a strange turn for the great warrior chief. He was presented as a curiosity, the Indian who had killed Custer, though he had not personally participated in that battle. He earned good money and sent most of it back to his people. He met President Grover Cleveland and saw the vast numbers of white people in their cities. The experience reinforced his understanding that his people could never defeat the whites through warfare. There were simply too many of them. After a season with the Wild West show, Sitting Bull returned to Standing Rock Reservation. He lived quietly, farming a small plot of land, though he never fully embraced the agricultural life the government wanted to impose. He had 2 wives, several children, and maintained a household that followed traditional Lakota customs as much as possible under reservation conditions. In 1889, the ghost dance movement reached the Lakota reservations. This religious movement, started by a Paiute prophet named Wovoka, promised that the white men would disappear, the buffalo would return, and the dead would come back to life if the people performed a special dance. The ghost dance offered hope to desperate people who had lost everything. Sitting Bull was skeptical of the ghost dance theology, but he defended his people's right to practice their religion. When some of his followers began participating in ghost dances, Agent McLaughlin became alarmed. The government feared that the ghost dance was a prelude to an uprising. Sitting Bull's support for the dancers, even though he rarely participated himself, made him a target. McLaughlin decided that Sitting Bull must be arrested. On December 15, 1890, Indian police arrived at Sitting Bull's cabin before dawn to arrest him. The police were Lakota themselves, working for the government. Sitting Bull agreed to go with them, but his followers gathered and tensions escalated. In the confrontation that followed, one of Sitting Bull's supporters shot the leader of the police. The police immediately shot Sitting Bull, killing him instantly. In the gunfight that followed, several more people died, including Sitting Bull's son Crowfoot. Sitting Bull was 59 years old. His body was taken to Fort Yates and buried in a simple grave. The man who had led his people in their greatest victory and their longest resistance was gone. 2 weeks later, the Wounded Knee Massacre occurred, where the 7th Cavalry killed approximately 300 Lakota men, women, and children. The era of armed resistance was over. Sitting Bull's legacy is that of an authentic American hero and tragic figure. He fought to preserve his people's way of life against impossible odds. He never surrendered his principles, even when it cost him everything. He was a warrior, a spiritual leader, and a voice for indigenous rights in an era of conquest and forced assimilation. His life story encapsulates the tragedy of the Plains Indians and their collision with American expansion. Modern historians recognize Sitting Bull as one of the most important Native American leaders in history. His resistance to American expansion became legendary. His spiritual leadership provided hope and guidance to his people during their darkest hours. His refusal to compromise his principles made him a symbol of indigenous resistance worldwide. Perhaps the most fitting assessment of Sitting Bull comes from his own words. He once said that he wished all to know that he did not propose to sell any part of his country, and that he had no country to sell. He faced impossible choices throughout his life and never abandoned his people or his principles. This courage, combined with spiritual wisdom, tactical skill, and an unbreakable commitment to freedom, defined his character. Sitting Bull represents a particular type of American hero, the leader who stands firm for his principles even when facing overwhelming power. His story inspired generations of people who saw in him proof that dignity and honor matter more than victory or survival. He chose to live and die as a free man rather than accept a comfortable submission. In the end, Sitting Bull was neither a perfect man nor a saint, but rather an extraordinary individual who lived during extraordinary times. His legacy includes his military victories, his spiritual leadership, and his unwavering defense of his people's rights. He is remembered today as one of the greatest Native American leaders and as a symbol of indigenous resistance and dignity. His life spanned an era of incredible change, from the height of Plains Indian culture to its destruction, from freedom to confinement, from abundance to poverty. He participated in that transformation not as a willing participant, but as a resistor who fought to preserve what was being destroyed. Sitting Bull was in death as in life a man of principle and courage, remembered for his leadership, his spiritual power, and his unwavering commitment to his people and their way of life.